7:44, 16 before 8 o'clock. It's Indiana in the morning, and it's WCCS. 101.1 FM, AM 1160, WCCSradio.com. That fellow right over there, that's Bob Pollock from the Extension joining us here this morning. We can talk about lawns and gardens and such. Give him a call at 479-1160, 349-WCCS. Our visit presented by Marcus & Mack, voted best law firm and best personal injury lawyer 3 years in a row in the Best of Indiana County contest. Visit them online, marcusandmack.com. Good morning.
Good morning.
It's been rather cold here in this late stage of February. We're entering into the latter stages of the month.
Yes, we are.
And some snow falling outside the studios right now. I don't know that that's going to have any effect at all on the spring growing season. Do you?
No, other than to help keep some moisture in the ground early, right?
Yeah. It's much more harmful when we have the freeze-thaw cycle, though, isn't
Yes.
it?
Yeah, that's much more. Yeah, those wide swings in temperature definitely affect plants more than this does.
Yeah.
This is kind of nice for them. And when it's cold like this, to have snow cover on the ground, that insulates the ground.
Mm-hmm.
So even though the ground's cold and hard, that still provides a layer of insulation that helps protect the plants that are underneath.
We enter into the month of March very soon, a week from now. And that being the case, we'll probably have a few of those freeze-thaw cycles and have to, once the buds come out, wonder if we're going to have as much of a growing season as we might have had, particularly when we think of fruit trees.
Right, we? Right. Yeah, always in the spring, if we start to get, if this changes, if we go out of this pattern and all of a sudden we get warmer conditions, then that starts to bring plants out of their dormancy, and then we're always, okay, when's growth going to happen? Are the buds starting to swell? Excuse me. And then when they come out, of course, during the flowering time, that's the critical time, and we'll just have to wait and see how that plays out.
Yeah. Now we have. For the past several years, every year has an extended dry spell in the summertime. The last several years, there have been to the point where we've had to have droughts declared, or at least drought warnings and things of that nature. And so we wonder about water tables. We have said in the past, it's really as much about the timing of the rainfall as it is the amount of the rainfall. That is helping us. Right now, though, we're building those tables right back up, aren't we?
Yes, we are. Yeah, it's always good to start out strong, and that hopefully will help us get through. But you're right. We always seem to have those periods of time that it dries. We just don't get any rainfall, and we have to work through that. We actually just last week we had our run of commercial tree fruit grower meetings across the state, and really our theme this year had to do with water. On those perennial crops, at least in Pennsylvania, it's less common to have irrigation systems for those crops because, they're perennial, they're trees. But, in more recent years, with these fluctuations and with these dry spells, it can easily happen when fruit are trying to ripen and put on their, size up and mature. And especially we can run into that with peaches, tend to kind of hit in a window where we're more likely to have those dry spells. So, we were talking about, use of trickle irrigation and what is the plant response to these dry spells and when do plants need the water the most? So that's been, and we haven't really, we might go for a week or two, but this past year we went for weeks. Some areas of the state went for months without any significant rainfall, and that will definitely have an effect on the size of the crop, the quantity, and size of individual fruit, and also the yield or the total quantity of fruit. But then, that size, makes a big difference. When you think about what you're buying in the store and what are individual apples, those are usually bigger apples that are sold individually versus the bagged apples. And so if a big percentage of your crop's in smaller bagged apples, you're not going to make as much money as if you had larger size fruit. So that all matters.
You have said in the past that when it comes to apple trees in particular, the tree produces so much, it overproduces to protect its crop. And you've always been an advocate of, not letting those develop into actual fruit when those blossoms come out. And
Yes.
And doing what you can to eliminate some of that so that you'll have better fruit.
Correct. You will have nicer and better fruit. You will maintain the health of the tree, is really important, because as we think about the growing season, as the fruit on those trees are maturing and getting ready to harvest, the tree is also thinking about and trying to produce the buds, the flower buds, for next year. And so if we have too heavy of a crop load, that really stresses the tree. And then if you add drought stress on top of that, those combine together to where, you could have a nice crop of fruit on there this year, but because of that and the drought stress, they don't make good buds for next year, and you might not have any fruit on that tree next year. And we call that alternate year bearing. There are some varieties that tend to kind of naturally do that more than others, so you really have to watch how many fruit you keep on the tree. And we're moving into pruning season. Of course, larger orchards are already, trying to get some of that done now. But it really is an important annual function to kind of go in there and prune those trees to keep the structure, to keep them open enough. That also relates later on to fruit quality, in that we keep the tree open. That lets more light in, and so the fruit that are on that tree will be of a higher quality. They will color up better because you can get some light into the tree. Well,
that was one of the things I was going to ask you about next, was the fact that orchard owners, they'll keep their trees deliberately smaller by the annual pruning that they do.
Yes.
They want them to be a certain shape and size, and so they'll do that. By the way, we've got a truck hung up here in the corner.
Yep, too tight of a turn.
In downtown Indiana, watch out. And in Elderton, you need to watch out, too. We'll tell you about that in a second. But the trees themselves, professional tree growers, apple orchard owners, they'll prune those trees so they'll have smaller trees, which might not look as healthy to the average person driving by, but they're actually healthier because they're keeping them pruned out, just as you just said. The guy or gal who has 2 or 3 apple trees in their backyard, they're not going to keep their trees that
But they could.
That small. They could.
They could. They should.
But generally, they're not going to. Therefore, their fruit is smaller.
Yeah.
Because they've just got a tree that is overproducing. It's not.
And you'll tend.
It doesn't know.
That's right. That's right. You'll also tend, because it's shaded too much in the middle of the tree, that will become unproductive. It's just wood, because there's not enough light that gets to the interior portion of the tree. So we need to have that opened up. So that we do get light in there, so that we can still maintain 2 to 5 year old wood on an apple tree is the most productive wood. And that's another reason we prune those types of trees, is to encourage some new growth, so that we always can kind of try to maintain a balance there of younger wood and older wood. The oldest wood, of course, is the structural part of the tree, those main trunk and the branches. And there's various forms that people use these days, whether it's trellised or untrellised. And another key way that you can affect the size of the tree is to use a dwarfing tree. So almost all the trees you see in commercial orchards, and most of what's for sale anymore, is really some sort of dwarfing size tree, and that's the other place where water comes into play, is these most dwarfing trees that might only get 6 to 8 feet tall also have a smaller root system, because they're naturally a smaller tree. And so those trees can be affected by drought stress a lot quicker than a semi-standard. A standard tree is what they just call a seedling tree.
Yeah.
That's not grafted, it's on its own root. It grew from a seed, and that seed turned into a tree. And so that's a standard tree, and you really don't see those anymore other than just here or there out in a field.
Yeah.
Because they get big, take a lot more effort to work on, to prune, to maintain, to harvest. You got to use ladders to climb up in there to get fruit.
Yeah.
So we've gone almost completely away from that large of a tree.
But for those who have a tree in the backyard that's making apples every year, I imagine for them it takes a little bit of courage to try to cut away what appears to be really healthy, strong, good wood in order to promote growth and productivity.
Yes.
We can see why they would be scared of doing something like that.
Yes. Ornamental shade trees are a whole different ballgame than fruit trees. Maintained very differently, and we don't want to maintain either in the other system. We want to maintain those in their own system based on the needs of that plant. And so when we try to make a shade tree like a fruit tree, we're going to have problems.
Yeah.
It's a whole different ball game, whole different set of rules. But fruit trees we need to maintain those and the structure. If we don't have good, strong branches, then that's when we don't take any fruit off. That's when we can have splitting of branches from that heavy crop load. That branch is not able to support that weight. So that's a reason we prune. That's also a reason we thin. And thinning,
thinning that apple crop, you mean?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, whatever the fruit crop is, you can get away with plums and things like that a little
lighter
bit.
Fruits.
And not thin those so much. However, the principles still hold that we need to try to maintain a consistent crop load on those trees as well. But thinning, one fruit about every 5 inches on a branch. That's really where you're trying to be. But if you let that tree, if we have a good spring and we don't have any freezes and nothing takes any of those blossoms off, you might have 10 fruit in that same distance where we only want 1.
So that's where the phrase "nip it in the bud" really comes from. You have to nip it in the bud, don't you? Literally.
And one of the newer techniques that they're working on is actually flower bud thinning. You don't wait till those fruit get pollinated and they're starting to grow. You can actually go in and thin during bloom to try and reduce the crop load then. Because ultimately you're trying to use those techniques that are able to keep you from having to hand thin.
Yeah.
Because that's very labor intensive and time consuming, and so we're trying to minimize that as much as possible. But in the backyard, that's
fine.
just look at your tree and look at the overall health of the tree, and you can make decisions based on that too. How vigorous your tree is. You can thin that out, and look at the crop, look at the tree. How much will this hold? Is the tree good and healthy?
Yeah.
And then you might leave it a little bit heavier because you have a good, strong, vigorous tree you're working with.
And don't just bite into the apple. There could be a bee right there. All right. Thank you, Robert.
You're welcome.
It's Indiana in the Morning. Now, we want to get this out there for you. In Elderton, the traffic light there at the Dollar General, there's a pole down across the road. Traffic lights came crashing down, all kinds of debris, and traffic is not moving through there right now. So if you travel 422 through Elderton, right now there by the Dollar General store, they've got a mess. The buses have all rerouted, and you're going to have to reroute as well because you're not driving through there at this moment, okay? Be aware of that as you're moving about here this morning, that there is a problem there in Elderton, the light at the Dollar General, all right? It's Indiana in the Morning. It's WCCS 101.1 FM, AM 1160, WCCSradio.com. Understand when those lights came down, they came smashing down. So there's a lot of debris in that area.